Wow. Pretty badass. Good job on that. Did you narrate that, Matt?
Hey, yeah, yeah, I did that. I have a project. It's called Haunted Abbey Mythos, and we do things like that. I narrate these kind of classic weird tales, and I have a friend who does that ambient music like that. His name is John Zaremba.
You know,
Really
the
talented
background
guy.
music like really influenced the tone of that. You know, it's like there was no redundant, there was no mediocrity in there. It was you know. By the way, this is one of my co-hosts, Ben. So all right, now the room's starting to fill up. We should have a few more joining, but not too many more. And here is your co-author, Howie Bentley. Howie Bentley and Matthew Knight, authors of Karnov, Phantom Clad Rider of the Cosmic Ice. So how you guys doing? Good weekend? What was that, Howie?
Doing good, yeah.
I said, fine yourself.
Yes. I just got through reading this badass book like a week ago, and I can't get over it. It's the fact that he teams up with a vampire to take out other vampires. You know, I mean, that's not like a new idea, but the way that you guys pulled it off was eloquent. And I love that he vampirized an elk as his flying steed. That was awesome. Merclethon.
Matt,
Yeah, yeah.
those are all Matt.
Yeah, those are I think both of those elements come from the first book of the second episode. Yeah, that's where all the kind of stuff with the vampire sidekick Azanthine comes in.
And of course, you also wrote this along with, by the way, my other co-host has filtered in here, Zach.
What's up?
Everybody will probably have something to say eventually. But so yeah, the room's filling up, and so
Cool.
one of your co-authors is actually in some sort of metal band that I've heard about over the years, but never actually listened to them. Bal Sagoth, which is kind of a Lovecraftian name, right?
Yeah, that actually I think comes from Robert E. Howard's story, The Gods of Balsagoth, I believe. Is that right, Howie?
Yeah, that's it. It's not about the golf. It's also, there are a few titles for that story. It's also called The Blind Goddess of Boston.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Howie, you're muffled really badly, and I can barely understand you.
Yeah,
Can you try to do something with your mic?
I was having trouble hearing you.
Okay, let me check.
Is there a setting you can adjust to? Because you were coming in clear earlier when we tested it.
Okay, I turned it off and turned it back on. How about now?
Yes.
There you go.
That's
you're
way
fine.
better.
Now you're
Okay.
fine.
Always seems to.
So about Byron, Byron Roberts, your third author.
Yeah.
Right.
He's in the middle band Balsagoth, which is from a Robert E. Howard story, you say?
Right. The Blonde God. Well, the Gods of Balsagoth. There are a few titles for that story. I know at least two. Is the Gods of Balsagoth and also the Blonde Goddess of Balsagoth. I think there's maybe another title too. It might be the Witch from Hell's Kitchen or something like that as well. Byron is in Balsagoth. Now, Matt and I are in separate metal bands. We're all in metal band stuff.
Oh, really? What are you guys in?
Well, I speak for myself. I'm in Cauldron Born, which is a band name I took from Lloyd Alexander's The Black Cauldron I read when I was 10 years old. I was really impressed with the concept of the Cauldron Born and the name Cauldron Born, but I didn't really like, even at that age, I thought the book was kind of childish, but the concept stuck with me. So I called my band later on Cauldron Born, which I write, fantasy lyrics, kind of like the stuff you're reading there, the sword and sorcery. And
Right.
And then also I have another band that's like early Black Sabbath kind of stuff. It's called Briton Writes, Briton Writes. And of course, Matt has a number of projects going on. I'll let Matt speak for himself. I'll be quiet for a minute now. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Howie. Yeah, I play in a band called Eternal Winter. We're like kind of a unique style of true heavy metal. It's pretty epic. And we also have like this heroic fantasy saga that all the lyrics are based on. I just finished up the brand new record, and it's coming out on September 16th, actually. And actually, that particular album is based on all kinds of different stories from authors that have inspired me over the years. So there's songs about, stories by Robert E. Howard and Michael Moorcock, Clark Ashton Smith, and yeah, a number of others. So yeah, like Howie said, I have a couple other projects. The thing we just heard, the Karnov excerpt, that is another project I have called Haunted Abbey Mythos. Me and a friend of mine, John Zaremba, we do those albums that are like that. Um, and yeah, several other things, but that's my main thing is Eternal Winter. And yeah, we have the new record coming out here soon.
So I mean, you do any audiobooks with that voice?
Yeah, actually we did The Beast of Averoigne by Clark Ashton Smith. That was the first one I did, and he's one of my favorite authors, and I was really able to get into, cool weird vibe with his stuff. And then we recently did a release called The Mountain of Souls, and that one is by Gustav Beckwith. It's hard for me to pronounce his name, but he did. It's translated too. We kind of translated it. The original thing is called El Monte de las Animas, and it's a old Gothic Spanish tale that a lot of people aren't really familiar with, but it kind of has this Poe-esque thing going on. And there was a series of horror films by an Italian director back in the 70s, I believe, who did these movies based on this concept that stories about, which is like these undead Templar knights. And yeah, that was called the Blind Dead series, and there's several
Oh yeah,
movies.
Tombs of the Blind Dead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, we did the story that those movies are based on. Um, yeah, and we called it the Mountain of Souls because we kind of translated it. So yeah, that's my other project. And it's very similar to what we just heard with the Karnov excerpt that I did.
Man, you guys really are true to the metal image. I mean, heavy metal and fantasy go hand in hand for whatever reason. I guess it's the epic Wagnerian, tone that
Yeah.
matches them so well, But it's real rich material, and it can be played for laughs or it can be played totally deathly serious, And I think that you guys did a good job of that here. Now, my friends here have not read Karnov, and I don't think Sword and Sorcery is typically their style, but inform newcomers what Karnov's temperament is, what is his story, and also what is this cosmic ice that he channels when he's in battle.
Well, Karnov is a warrior. Who in the first book he's coming home from battle. He finds his family slain, and he discovers that it's due to these vampires that have invaded his town. Namely, this Lord Gormantia, who's like the vampire lord. He's the guy that's on the book cover. And so he vows vengeance against Gormantia, and with the aid of this witch, and this like ritualistic magic, he gains this power, which is he's able to absorb souls of the undead, and then his entire frame is encased in like this armor, and it's like this ice armor that gives him all this energy and power, and swirling throughout his armor is like the souls of the vampires he slays. And he's also able to traverse worlds. He can open these portals and these gateways and travel throughout the realm. And yeah, that's pretty much his thing.
For some reason, I get this image in my head of like playing a video game. You know, it's like where the more zombies and vampires you slay, it's like the energy comes to you like you're collecting rings or of energy or like coins or something. I mean, I know you're going for something more literary, but I mean, you know, crossover, man. You know, you gotta admit it would be a cool video game.
Yeah, sure.
But no, I think that I was expecting some fairly standard, you know, like Conan type stuff in the beginning, and then when the witch, or was it a witch or a female vampire, that thought they were going to betray him and do him in, and he just disposed of them, right? That was in the at the end of the first portion, right?
Yeah, I think that was. I think you're speaking of actually one of Howie's characters that he created, Zycanthia. Is that right, Howie?
Boy, these names are really hard to pronounce. So I'm glad that you're informing me on how to do that, because I didn't know if it was Merkelthanon or, you know, so it's helpful. You know, these are big names, Merkelthanon and Azanthine. I didn't know how to say that one either.
Yeah, that's how I say it.
But I think that when he meets up with Azanthine, that adds a whole other dynamic to the story. That's when I knew that, you know, this was going to be a different story. You know, this wasn't going to be the standard fare. And because this guy from the first, you know, vampire clan, you know, from like the ancient clan, who looked down on these, you know, base-born savage vampires, you know, because they're not noble like he is. I thought that was an interesting touch, but mainly my favorite part was when he turned the elk into his undead riding steed. I thought that was the most awesome thing.
Cool.
But
glad you liked it.
What do you guys? Are you guys gonna write any more Karnov stories?
Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? When Byron, who did an excellent job of ending the story both times, or finalizing, you know, the books, you know, Howie and I would always joke when we'd be talking about how he had the most difficult part, because we're coming up with these plots, but Byron actually had to come up with these epic endings. But anyway, he left it pretty open both times, and that's one of the reasons why it wasn't too difficult to have a second book, or a second episode, I mean, within the book. So yeah, so it's the ending is pretty much wide open. We definitely could continue it at some point.
Cool. What was it like, you know, handing off the story to, like, passing it along between the three of you? How did you handle that? Howie, you want to start with that answer?
How was it? You mean, how was it receiving it or handing it off to Byron? I just created a bunch of.
How did you organize who was writing which part?
Well, it was really a round robin. I'll let Matt explain that in a minute. The inspiration behind the round robin, that was his idea. But Matt would just write a part, and we didn't have an outline. We would just pass it on to the next guy. And like Matt was saying, it's like we got to have fun, but then Byron was the problem solver. It was almost like we were giving him a complicated math problem to solve, which, like, here, finish this for us, you know, after we created all the characters and the storyline. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it, and I liked the humor, putting some humor in it. It was a change for me, because some of my stories have really somber kind of tone to them, like Robert E. Howard. I write about this character named Argentir, who's a barbarian swordsman who transforms into a werewolf. And so they're really somber Howardian type stories. And then Matt has this totally different, like, than anybody else writes, this concept and these ideas with Karnov. And I had a lot of fun with it. I could put some humor into it too, which, you know, that is done in some really classic sword and sorcery, like Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mauser stories, and Clark Ashton Smith had a lot of gallows humor in his Hyperborea Tales and Tales of Zothique. But Matt, you know, what he gave me to work with really allowed me to do that and do something different and have a lot of fun with it. And with that thought, I'll turn it over to Matt and let him tell you about the round robin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. And first of all, I got to say I really agree with you, Howie. When I would hand it off to Howie, and he would take a couple weeks to write it. I'd get the draft that he wrote back, and I would be just like extremely excited. I'd be like yelling out loud, like so happy about everything I read. And a big thing with that was because the tone was like perfect. We it was almost like the writing style was very much different with all three of us. But I think personally, I think the tone of the story was the same, which it could be totally different. My inspiration for the idea of doing a round robin was from I read this book called Gore Kinslayer, and I thought it was a really cool idea. I
No,
guess
are you talking about John Norman's Gore, or is this a different kind of thing?
no. This was actually a book that was compiled in the 70s, I believe, or no, I think it was the early 80s, and it was a bunch of sword and sorcery authors taking an unfinished Robert E. Howard tale and basically like running with it, and they took it in like a really crazy direction. I think like it starts off with this guy who's like a warrior who's like raised by wolves and he's like real barbaric, and then I think like by the time all 12 authors, or maybe even more, I can't remember, are done with it, like the guy has like a bionic arm and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I really enjoyed the story, and it had like some authors I really like in it. Michael Moorcock was one of them, and more so than like the story, because it ended up being kind of crazy. I really enjoyed how each author would put his own style, into the next chapter, and then they'd hand it off, and it all of a sudden you're reading the same story, but it's by a different guy, and it has a different vibe, and I really like that. So at the time, Howie and Byron and I were writing stories that were appearing in similar like anthologies, and we were all friends, knew each other. Howie and I have been friends for years, for a really long time. We all play in metal bands, so I thought, well, this could be really cool if we did a book like this, but with just three of us. Because with the Gore Kinslayer book, I thought that one got a little crazy because there were so many. But to have only three authors who were all kind of on the same page anyway, I thought that it could work, and in the end, I think it worked out pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that Byron has also written stories for this character named Kalen Tor. Howie, you've written several, including one that I'm reading right now called The Snake Man's Bane. And I'll get to that in a minute. Matthew, do you have any others outside of this? Or are you the youngest author or what?
Yeah, I have. I probably am, because I'm very busy with the band, and I have limited time to write. But I do try and get some things down on paper. I have some stories that are in some various anthologies, and I have this concept that my band sings about. It's like the Eternal Winter Saga, and that's old, and I really need to revise it. But I do plan to do that soon. I also have this this kind of cycle that I've started. It's called the Ivana Cycle, and I have a story called The Cult of Ivana that appears in the Barbarian Crowns anthology, and that was kind of the beginning of that. And I've written some sequels that hopefully will see the light of day pretty soon.
Cool. Now, I do need to give some air to my friends here. Ben, Zach, if either of you guys have questions, feel free to launch now.
I don't have anything.
Or just comments to add or anything.
I was going to ask if you remembered Gregor's fantasy name for you that he came up with.
For me?
Yeah.
No, what?
The Great Shirtless One.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I do. What does that have to do with this, though?
Fantasy name.
Yeah. Can't you see yourself like on the cover of a fantasy novel holding holding a sword up with a hot bitch in a chainmail bikini on your leg, and it's just titled "The Great Shirtless One."
Yeah, that I would read it. But anyway, so as far as Howie, as far as the Snake Man's Bane goes, I feel like you wanted to call this character, this spirit that is summoned via the rune. I feel like you wanted to call that spirit Thor, but you ended up calling it Thorn instead.
Well, Thorn is a rune. It's the third rune in the Armanan rune row, which is an 18 is an 18 rune row. And so of course, runes are magical, a magical alphabet. And the Thorn rune is one of the runes that represents Thor's hammer. It's a martial rune. Usually in rune magic, when somebody's placing a curse, they'll use the Thorn rune, and there are others as well, but that one's almost always used.
But you also bring up Odin. See, when Odin is wiped out in the battle with was it the commander or Odin gets brought into it at some point, and so that's why I thought maybe he's just tired of hearing the name Thor and just wanted to call him Thorn, But I mean, he's a badass character. Don't get me wrong,
Right. The Thorn character is the Thorn rune incarnate.
Okay.
So he's like a demon or a god that manifests itself physically when the rune is invoked. Rune magic is totally different than Levantine magic, where they summon demons and angels and that sort of thing. Rune magic, Northern European magic, Germanic, is a product of the Germanic psyche, and it's quite different. And it's the realms. These runes are realms, and they have so many things that they correspond to and represent.
Mm. Now, it's not just one character, though, throughout this tale here. It's several that experience the power of the Thorn rune, right? Like, I just started reading it today, and some of the names are a bit hefty. So you forgive me if I can't, remember them off the top of my head. But I remember the female very well, felt like what it was a takeoff of Boudica, the queen of the Iceni, who fought the Roman Empire and frustrated their plans of expansion in real legitimate history. That was a takeoff of her, correct?
Well, the second story in the Snake Man's Bane, that's a collection, my sword and sorcery tale. And the second story in the Snake Man's Bane is also a Thorn tale that deals with the aftermath of the Iceni revolt, when Boudica's revolt was crushed by the Romans. Mm-hmm. And it deals with the aftermath of that and Boudica's daughter. And she, of course, invokes the Thorn rune and for vengeance on the Romans. So, that's the second story. It's called All Will Be Righted on Samhain. It's spelled Samhain.
Oh, that's because that's the season. That's that's the condition for the spell to work, right? Basically, that it has to be on that night of Samhain or so.
Well, I mean, it can be that I tied into that. Samhain, which is Halloween. I tied into that myth or whatever you want to call it there. But he's invoked under different circumstances and at different times. The Thorn rune is, and the Thorn was a character that started off as the mascot for my band Cauldron Born. Thorn is on the cover of every Cauldron Born album. And I thought at one time I really should write a story about Thorn. And I wrote the first story that I wrote was All Will Be Righted on Samhain. It was originally published in Swords of Steel. DMR Books in Chicago puts out an anthology series called Swords of Steel. And I contributed to all 3 volumes of that. And All Will Be Righted on Samhain was published in the first volume of Swords of Steel.
Mm-hmm. So are you pretty well studied on history and the time of the Roman Empire and everything?
I wouldn't say well studied. I mean, there are guys who are much deeper into it than I am, like Richard L. Tierney, who writes about a character during the height of Imperial Rome, a character named Simon of Geta. So there are guys that are a lot more knowledgeable about it than I am. I dabble in history and I know enough to write sword and sorcery fairly convincingly, but I, I'm spotty, here and there on history.
I feel like the best Boudica story has not yet been written to this day. Some have tried, but it just feels like none of them have matched the real world, epic scale, of this one woman who was wronged and raped and widowed by this vastly, huge empire, and how she managed to frustrate their plans of expansion for many years, with much fewer resources. I just feel like the best Boudica work has never been written to this day. Don't you?
Well, I haven't read. I mean, other than history, I do read history. But I haven't read any factional or historical fiction regarding Boudica. Mm-hmm. I've just read dry text on Boudica.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean that's. I think I'm at the end of Bunduika's story. That's the daughter.
Yeah,
Bunduika or Bunduika?
Bunduika.
Okay. Boy, these names are mouthfuls, man. I'm telling you. So is the sword and sorcery thing? Do you guys feel like that flag is still flying high? Is there a lot of is it a competitive market out there? Is it a market at all? And are there any other sword and sorcery authors that you guys don't jive well with? Perhaps if you get together for conventions and stuff that you prefer to stay away from, or I mean, what's it like? Is there a market at all, or is it gone?
Yeah, I think there seems to be a resurgence, an interest in sword and sorcery, a renewed interest in it, and you're starting to see these different anthologies, and of course DMR Books, they publish pretty much exclusively sword and sorcery. Matt and I have been in other anthologies together. He mentioned Barbarian Crowns, and then Matt and Byron, they were in another one. I'll let him tell you about that in a minute, which we were initially going to put the first episode of Karnov in, but I'll save that for Matt. But yeah, there seems to be a lot of interest in it. And of course, Robert M. Price has brought back Lynn Carter's Flashing Swords series, and that looks to be very promising. And so, yeah, I mean, it's things are looking up for sword and sorcery, I believe. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. I think exactly what you said. DMR Books, Dave's just on a roll. I mean, he's constantly putting out new stuff, and all of it's killer. Yeah, the anthologies that Howie mentioned, that I also had stories in. Byron and I had tales in one called Dreams of Fire and Steel, and that was published by Nocturnicorn Press, I believe. The other one that I was in as well with Howie and Byron was called The Devil's Armory. Actually, there was a misprint with that one, and there's some that have my story in it, and some don't. Some of them are like, no, I'm sorry. The story was published in Barbarian Crowns as well. But anyway, yeah, that was by Barbed Wire Butterfly, I think.
That's an awesome name.
Yeah.
I bet it's already defunct, though. It's the sad part.
Yeah, I don't know. That was one of yeah, they published that one. But outside of the things that we've done, I mean, I see that yeah, it seems to be coming back, kind of having a resurgence. I've read some of the newer stuff. I've read Howie and Byron's books. I really am just kind of rooted in the classics still. Whenever I want to read something like that, I'm pulling out something, that I'm familiar with that it's been a while and just need to revisit. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of new stuff out there.
What is Kalen Tor's story? I know Byron's not here to advocate for his character himself, but I hear he's could be working on some new Kalen Tor series stories here soon. What do you know anything about that character? You read any of his work yet?
Yeah, I have. And he's one of the heroes that's in his cycle that he sings about in his balsa golf band. Um, I can't really go into detail about that. I know I've really enjoyed everything I've read. Byron's style and his prose is very rich, and he uses a lot of kind of rare words and these really thought out and well constructed long sentences. His style
Purple
is really
prose.
good.
They call it purple prose, right?
Right.
The eldritch god, the eldritch powers,
Yeah.
and the gibbous moon. Yeah, that's called purple prose.
Right, and I enjoy it very, very much. I
Yeah.
think he's awesome. So yeah, that's all I can really say is I just that I highly recommend it.
What do you guys think of some of these other? Oh, somebody listened to Al Jazeera, or what was that?
That was your mom.
Okay.
On my ball sack.
No. Anyway, so I mean, is there any interest or disinterest in like other characters that are cropping up here, like Gunthar and this character in the Eye of Sunu by Schuyler Hernstrom? Either one of these sound familiar?
Well, I've heard great things about Schuyler Hernstrom. I have yet to read that. I've been meaning to pick that book up, and so I suppose I'll look into it. I tend to read a lot of old stuff too. I read some stuff from some friends and whatnot, but mostly older stuff. And see, that's one of the problems you asked about sword and sorcery. Was it a viable thing now? One of the problems with sword and sorcery is a lot of guys do the same thing I do, and they stick to the classics, and they read the same Howard stories over and over, the same Clark Ashton Smith and Michael Moorcock stuff, and they'll spend a bunch of money on a new Howard collection that comes out with just different artwork and new introduction or whatever, but they won't plunk down their hard-earned dollar for a new writer. So that's one of the problems we face, I think, with writing sword and sorcery and the market is a lot of the guys just stick to the classics.
So yeah, I mean, but you guys are breathing some new life into it, and so hopefully people will give that a chance, and because a thing can't die if people continue to add to it, as far as in literature,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody's always keeping it alive, then I mean, yeah, it won't die. Yeah, it'll stay relevant,
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So I'm just amazed how you guys are able to get in so many anthologies when everywhere I look, it seems like any viable market is dried up and died and gone away. But I mean, you guys are able to find them out there. That's what's amazing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's quite a few, and like I said, it seems to be growing, proliferating. This thing with the sword and sorcery. There's more anthologies popping up. There's magazines like Kirsoba that new writers can get in. They can send in, their submissions, and Kirsoba will publish a lot of that stuff. If it's written in more of a classic pulp style, like Weird Tales from the 30s, or like Planet Stories from the 40s, which they publish primarily sword and planet stuff in the tradition of Edgar Rice Burroughs. But a lot of writers like Lee Brackett and Edmund Hamilton and so on It did that kind of stuff. But that's what these magazines are looking for. They're wanting retro kind of pulp stuff. And really, what we did with Karnov, I don't think is really retro. It's like you were talking about. We're extending a tradition, and we're trying to keep the tradition alive. I have a hard time confining myself just to writing purely pulp style. I have done it, but I don't enjoy it as much as just being able to do my own thing, and of course have a lot more freedom with something like Matt did with Karnov.
Well, as far as Karnov goes, we're still there's still a lot about that world and that time period that he's in, that we don't really know. And of course, with the aid of the cosmic ice, that sounds so metal geekish. I love, but with the power of the cosmic ice, he can traverse other dimensions even. So, I mean, there are all these different worlds that he could be opening up, each time you guys write about him. And I'd like to even see what he can do against werewolves. I'm sure he's going to run into a werewolf at some point, right? I mean,
yeah, that's a great idea. And yeah, you're totally right, because there's like this whole multiversal, interdimensional kind of thing happening. When at the beginning of the story, when the witch Devartha is doing the blood ritual and granting Karnov the powers, I have her call upon like these gods and like powerful beings from like all three of our mythos, so that right there just kind of sets the tone that this could really go any way. I mean, we could incorporate really whatever we wanted to, and yeah, that's why I did that. And I think you're totally right. We could really do anything we wanted.
right on. Well, I think I got in everything I wanted. I know that Ben and Zach have been kind of silent, but again, they read on a totally different, corner of literature. So, this might not be their bag, but I thank you guys for sitting through it, and I thank you guys for writing some great kick-ass fiction. Anything you want to promote or message you want to leave us with?
I just want to say thanks a lot for checking out the book. Really, really happy and glad that you enjoyed it. And thanks for having us on the show.
Okay. Howie?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate the support, and thanks for having us on the show. And hopefully we'll have some new stuff for you to check out in the not so distant future.
Yeah. And if I close out the show with like either Eternal Winter or a Cauldron Born, is that cool with you?
Oh, perfectly
Definitely.
fine.
I didn't think you mind. Okay. Thank you guys, and thank you guys for that kick-ass audible worthy narration of Karnov at the beginning. That was seriously badass. It really gave it atmosphere, all the music and background sound,
Sure thing. Thanks a lot for checking it out.
All right. Well, have a good night, guys. I guess we're going to move on, but that was great. And yeah, I'm going to keep reading for sure. I'm loving Snake Man's Bane too, by the way.
Great.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
All right.
Okay.
Take care. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Yeah, not bad. There it goes. Okay. So, how are we doing, guys?
I'm doing good.
I'm doing pretty good.
You got all shy on me, and now I know it's not your thing. The sword and sorcery. It couldn't be